Welcome back. And for today's video, I'm going to be covering just one topic, but it's a very important topic. And this is mostly aimed at newer or younger composers, because this is a mistake that every composer is going to make, several times in fact. It's just unavoidable. And if you do not learn this simple rule when you're composing music, you're going to have disastrous results later on down the road. And ask me how I know. So, what am I talking about? Well, let's get into it. Before I even explain anything, just take a look at this musical passage, and I want you to try to figure out what is problematic with this music. This was something I actually wrote many years ago. This was a draft of something that I was working on. Now at this moment, there's only two musical lines that are happening in the voices. You'll see there's a melody in the soprano part, and then the alto is supplying the harmony. And if we examine the voices here, we'll notice that the intervals are all parallel perfect fourths until we reach a certain point. But then what happens is we get to this point where there's an A against a D sharp. The D sharp is in the soprano, and the A natural is in the alto part. What I'm talking about for this video is known as writing an unintentional tritone. Writing a tritone is not a mistake, but writing a tritone that you are unaware of, that is always a mistake. Every new composer at some point is going to make this mistake of writing some harmony for something that they're working on, or writing something melodically, and they accidentally place a tritone in their piece that wasn't supposed to be there. The reason why unintentional tritones are a problem is that they often exist as something in isolation that happens once in a piece. The worst case scenario for this is that you, as the composer, you complete writing your piece, but you didn't catch the mistake. And then what happens is you hand your music to the ensemble that's going to perform it, and then it causes a lot of problems. Because the musicians will start sight reading the music, and they are caught off guard by the unexpected tritone. That tritone is going to definitely stick out in an obnoxious way. And then the conductor has to stop rehearsal and ask you, the composer, if that's what you really wanted. Of course, it's not what you really intended, but then you're stuck because you don't know what to do. What note do you have to change right on the spot? It's a really uncomfortable position to be in. It makes you look like you're unprepared. Now, how does this usually happen, though? What usually happens is you have a work that has a lot of tertian harmony, meaning thirds, and also perfect fifths, just the standard type of chords that you see in most music. But then what will happen is you'll have this random tritone, and it just looks and sounds out of place because it is out of place. Tritones written in this fashion are not common, and it's definitely going to appear as a mistake, and the musicians will get caught off guard. It takes away from the prior consistency that was in the rest of the piece. And consistency and context are very, very important in music. Because if your piece is all made up of just thirds and fifths, and then you suddenly just have one random tritone somewhere in the middle of the piece, it's going to sound really strange. Now, some of you might be asking, well, what if it's not a mistake? Most of the time, when a piece of music has a tritone in it, it's not going to just have one. It's going to have repeated tritones, because that communicates that it is intentional. When you have something repeat over and over again, it's obviously not a little mistake that appeared one time within a piece. And there are a lot of very famous pieces of music that have repeated tritones. It's nothing new. There's nothing controversial about having tritones in music. It's very, very common. It's just that you don't want to have just one random tritone in the middle of a piece. That's going to sound like a mistake. There are two kinds of unintentional tritones. The first type is making this mistake harmonically. This choral line, which I used at the beginning of this video, this is a harmonic tritone, meaning that two notes are played simultaneously. The other way you can make this mistake is melodically. Sometimes you may have a voice leading mistake. It may skip up or down to a tritone that you do not want. And this is something you really have to be careful with if you're writing directly into music notation programs on your computer, because sometimes if you don't watch the voice leading from the end of the page to the next page, there might be a tritone skip there, and you might not even be aware of it. This is why it's always better to play your music on the piano and not rely exclusively on the computer. How can a composer use the tritone in wiser ways? Well, first of all, if you're going to use a tritone, it's best to have it repeat several times so that the musicians know that's what you intended. And this also makes it easier for the musicians because they get used to playing it. It gets in their ear. Repetition is musicians' best friend for learning new music. So repeating a tritone is going to be a lot easier than just having one random tritone. The first movement from The Planets by Holst has repeated harmonic tritones. This is the very beginning of Sibelius's Fourth Symphony, which has repeated harmonic tritones. And this is one of my favorite pieces of music, the Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celesta by Bela Bartok. This example uses repeated harmonic tritones. Harmonic tritones are generally easier to perform because you're using two instruments or two singers. Of course, there are exceptions like the piano and the guitar, which can perform multiple tones at the same time. Another thing to know about the melodic tritone, for choral singers especially, singing a melodic tritone is going to be very difficult, although not impossible. That is why if you're going to write the tritone within a choral piece, it's best to repeat it and not just have it be an isolated tritone. One other thing to keep in mind is that if you are using a lot of tritones within a piece, and that's your intention, they tend to work better with more advanced musicians. That doesn't mean you always have to have the top-level professional musicians to perform tritones, no, but I'm just speaking in general. Is it totally wrong just to write one tritone in the middle of a piece of music? No. Perhaps there's a moment in the piece where a composer wanted to build up to some kind of climax, and they wanted to use the tritone for a specific reason. It's not wrong, just as long as that's what the composer really wanted. That is the key to writing with the tritone. It has to be intentional, or it will just not work. Let's go revisit that choral example at the beginning of this video. How might we fix the problem that exists in this music? Well, the most obvious way is to change the harmony in the alto part. I will just change the notes from this A, move it up to a B, and probably move the G up to an A. That is a much better voice leading than what I had before, and it avoids that unexpected tritone in isolation. Here's what we had before, and here's what we have now. In addition to changing the voice leading, there are some other options of what you could do. Simply adding a third voice in the choir could allow you to keep this tritone, because having a third voice that's also singing is going to change the overall context of the intervals. This tritone would no longer be an isolated tritone by itself, but would be within the context of another chord. I'll give you a better example to explain this concept. This is a short example from an old hymn book, and the title of this hymn is called Freedom. Now, if you carefully look at the voices here, you will also see there is a tritone between the alto and the tenor parts. But that's not really what's happening here. There's an additional note in the soprano, which is an A natural, and there's the addition of the bass note D. Adding these two notes to the chord completely changes the context. That bass is providing a very important root note of this chord, because without that bass note, this would just be an ambiguous tritone. And then the alto is singing the minor seventh, or what makes it a dominant seventh chord. And then that A up in the soprano, that is simply just the fifth. So this chord is voiced as root, third, minor seventh, and fifth. This is simply just a 5-7 dominant seventh chord in the key of G minor. There is a tritone between the major third and the minor seventh intervals. So yes, there is a harmonic tritone in the dominant seventh chord. However, it's not really the same thing because there's an added fifth and the root. So it's not the same thing as just having an isolated tritone. Now, having said that, you won't see this voicing in choral music as often as other types of voicings. Usually a dominant seventh chord will not be voiced this way, but you may see it from time to time, and it is considered acceptable. A dominant seventh chord is going to be a lot easier for a choir to sing than just a tritone. There are many other interesting chords that contain tritones. One of the most unusual ones is known as the French augmented sixth chord. I don't have time to get into the detail about that chord for this video, but just look into it and find out about it. But that chord contains two tritones within this one chord. Now, you could even take this lesson today and apply it to something much bigger when you're composing, and that is, every note in your piece should be intentional. There should not be any accidental notes in your entire piece. Now, some of you might say, well, what about a part where it says to improvise? That's intentional. You want people to improvise. Sure, some of the notes are going to be random, but that's your intention. You want people to improvise. And it's all about your intent. It cannot be accidental. It's your intention that matters most, and that is the whole point of this video. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor for this video. This video is sponsored by Ojaya Deep Meditation. I have tried numerous types of meditation in the past, and none of them even came close to the benefits that Ojaya has given me. Everywhere you look around in society, people are complaining that they do not have enough energy to tackle all the things they need to get done. They resort to things like harmful energy drinks. But there is a much better way, and that is with Ojaya meditation. Ojaya is taught out of the Earthborn Rainforest, which is located in Iowa, USA, but the class is actually online, so you can enjoy it from the comfort of your own home. Ojaya is not just a sponsor for my channel, it is something I use every single day in my life. You will not know the benefits of it until you try it for yourself. So go to ojaya.com today and sign up for your first 9 videos for free. I am composer Britt Andrew Burns. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon on the next video. Bye for now.